So Plato wants to argue that justice in the soul and justice in the city is the best. That's the best way to be. We need to know what justice is going to be, and then on his view, and try to understand why he thinks it's best. And it's helpful in thinking about that to remember what Socrates, the character in the earlier dialogue, says about wisdom and virtue. So in those earlier dialogues, Socrates tells us that to be reliably virtuous, you need wisdom. Why is that? Well, to be reliably virtuous, you need to reliably identify what is virtue, and the way to do that is to be wise, is to know what wisdom is. And that's fairly plausible. But then Socrates also tells us that wisdom is enough for virtue, that if you're wise, then you'll be virtuous. And why is that? Well, if you're wise, then you'll know what's good and what's bad, and so good things will seem good to you, and bad things will seem bad to you. Things will seem as they are, in particular in terms of evaluations, good and bad. And it's plausible that if something seems good to us, then we'll want it, we'll be motivated to get it, and that sort of that seeming good is a critical part of motivation, and that if something seems bad to us, then we'll want to not have it. And if those were both true and that was the whole story, we'd think, oh yeah, wisdom, if you know what's good and what's bad, then you will act in accordance with that knowledge because you'll be motivated to act in that way. The problem for this view seems to be that many times we think this thing is good, and yet we don't go after it. We think it would be good to, whatever it is, to eat less, to eat more, to exercise more, to work, to spend time with our friends or family, whatever, and then we don't do it. So how do those things fit together? We appear to believe it's good, and yet we're not motivated to do it. How does that work? Plato wants to agree with Socrates that if you're wise, then what is good will seem good to you, and what is bad will seem bad to you, that your evaluations of good and bad are correct. That's a key element of wisdom. And Plato also wants to say that if something seems good to you, then you'll want to do it. That a key part of what wanting is the thing that you want seems good to you, and same for not wanting seeming bad. But how do we then deal with this problem of thinking that seems good and yet we don't act to do it? Well, Plato thinks that the first thing we can note is that just because you want to do something, or you want something, doesn't mean that's the thing that you want the most. And if we could consider a group of people, we can imagine then, what does the group want to do the most? Well, different people are going to have different views about what's good and are going to have different desires for what the group should do. And that means, if we're agreeing with Socrates, that they have different views about what's good and bad for the group. Plato thinks that the same thing can be true of one individual, in particular that an individual has different parts, that the soul, our principle of life, who we are, has different parts, and that those different parts have different perspectives on what is good and bad, and therefore that those different parts have different desires and motivations, and that they can be in conflict, and that when they are in conflict, then the one that is the stronger will win out. And so it's true, that wisdom, if you're wise, then good things will seem good and bad things will seem bad, and therefore you'll be motivated to get the good things and to not do the bad things. But there may be another part of you that has different evaluations and is motivated to go in different directions. And that's how there can be conflict. That's how there can be this conflict that we observed when we were thinking about Socrates. So in light of this idea that there are different parts in the soul that can be in conflict, what Plato wants to tell us is that what is justice? Fundamentally, it's a certain sort of harmony in the soul. In particular, it's each element within the person doing its own job, where, with respect particularly to ruling and being ruled, are concerned. So there are going to be different parts of the soul. They're each trying to control the whole person. And justice is where each one of them is doing what it should in terms of ruling and being ruled. And therefore there's a certain sort of harmony in the soul. Plato has Socrates say, the just man regulates well what is really his own. He rules himself, puts himself in order, becomes his own friend, and harmonizes the three elements together, just as if they were literally the three defining notes of an octave, lowest, highest, and middle, as well as any others that may be in between. He binds together all of these, and from having been many, becomes entirely one, temperate and harmonious. Temperate meaning like self-restrained. We'll talk more about that word in a little bit. Socrates goes on to say, wisdom is the knowledge that oversees all of this. And so wisdom is going to have an important part to play in this soul. But this key idea is that there are different parts, and they're going to fit together with the right ones ruling and the right ones within the soul obeying. And in a friendly way, not in a sort of dominant and harsh way, but in a friendly way. He becomes his own friend. So, justice and harmony then. On Plato's view, soul harmony, that's the best thing you could get. It's good for itself and in its consequences. And justice is soul harmony, is having this harmonized soul, the soul harmonized in the right way. And therefore, justice would be for the best. But if we're inspired by Socrates to really go for wisdom and be questioning, then I think there's some questions that we would want to ask Plato. First of all, we might want to ask, what's so great about this internal soul harmony you're talking about? I mean, sure, sort of being at peace internally sounds nice, but maybe conflict is okay and it might be worth it. Maybe internal conflict could be creative or exciting. And, it's not clear why exactly internal harmony is amazing. That's what Socrates or Plato wants to tell us. Also, couldn't there be a harmonious soul that's united not around justice, but around injustice? You say that justice is the harmony of the soul, but you haven't really told us why we should believe that justice is harmony in the soul. And if harmony in the soul is a matter of internal agreement, couldn't someone be internally united around doing something really bad? And so we should really be worried about those two key claims that Plato wants to put forward. So how is Plato going to answer these questions or worries? Well, we need to learn more about what the actual parts of the soul are, according to Plato. And we also need to learn about the forms in the end to fully answer both of these questions. And we'll learn about the forms in our next module, but we'll be focused on the actual parts of the soul and how they fit together to create a just, harmonious soul in our next video.